Hello, my name is Sean Plott.
And my name's Tristan Brand.
Welcome to Why We Like It, the show where we talk about any story from any medium and why we think it's awesome. We've talked about Watchmen, the comic book, Hunger Games, movie/book, Game of Thrones, TV series/book series, and today we talk about far and away my favorite book series, the Dresden Files, which unfortunately was never made into a TV series. It's too bad.
It's very sad.
It will only ever be the greatest book series of all time. But for any of you who have never tuned into the show, welcome. Thrilled to have you. We're just going to talk about the fiction that we enjoy. We do spoil a significant amount of stuff. Dresden Files, book 1 through 12, that's Stormfront up through Changes. We will be likely spoiling at least some of. There's so much content there that there's no way we can spoil all of it.
We will be spoiling the end of Changes, which is not something you want spoiled if you haven't read the series. Just be aware of this.
But we'll leave Changes to the end of the show. That's one of the topics we want to touch on. But it's going to be spoiled. So let's go ahead and intro the books. I have my own intro prepared. But I actually want to hear, Tristan, how you intro. Actually, you're the one who originally recommended the Dresden Files to me.
Yes.
And I know I recommend the Dresden Files. God, to everyone. I've recommended it to my mother and my grandparents and to anyone who watches my other StarCraft shows, all my friends, everyone in my house. I actually have the first 3 or 4 books on my bookshelf out on loan. So kind of like my prepared spiel, but I want to hear how would you introduce it, and then I'm going to introduce it.
Sure. So the Dresden Files is an urban fantasy featuring this total badass named Harry Dresden, who's a wizard in modern-day Chicago, and he basically just deals with all sorts of supernatural nastiness, ranging from pretty much every mythology/trope that you can pretty much imagine. I mean, Butcher throws in almost all of them. He's got werewolves, he's got vampires, he's got fairies, he's got demons, he's got angels. We'll be talking about all of these things in greater depth later. But if you're a big fan of the sort of thriller genre in general, where basically you have some badass who beats up bad guys, you're already in a great place to love the Dresden Files. And then you combine that with the magic, the fantasy, and which Butcher treats just so well. And you just basically combine two very, very, very compelling concepts, and you end up with just this incredible series that is possibly my favorite series of all time. It's certainly up there. I mean, the coolest thing about the Dresden Files is after I read book 1, I was like, this is amazing. And then I looked over and I said, there are 11 more books in this series. And it's like, I get to go to Disney World 11 more times.
11 different Disney Worlds.
Yes.
And, sort of continuing a little bit on that, it's probably one of the only book series I've ever read where each book actually gets progressively better. To where Changes blew my mind. Actually,
Changes gave me chills. Like that, I don't get chills when I'm reading that much. And Changes is just like, holy shit.
I actually wonder if I can find this. Whoopsie daisies. Okay, you see, I accidentally dragged the video recording software straight into the screen. Well, the reason I moved it out of the way is I remember, this is completely aside the point of what we wanted to talk about today, but I remember Changes was so gripping to me. I was doing, for my full-time job, I do commentary for gaming tournaments, and I was at a tournament. It was in the semifinals or the finals, and I'd sit there, I'd cast the game, and then in the break, I would read Changes. And there was one time when it was actually, it comes back, it's like me, my co-commentator, there's a sponsors like up on the screen behind us at MLG, and then there's just this book. This is like Changes was like perfectly facing the camera. And I remember because I got tweets, people were like, oh my god, that book is so crazy. But I mean, I want to echo everything you said. Dresden Files, it's almost a series that takes a really simple formula and says, how do we utilize this formula to be this freeing element, to make it structured enough that it resonates with your brain with every book, but also has this ridiculous sweeping story arc. So like you said, Harry Dresden, the wizard in modern-day Chicago, each book is essentially based on the idea of a paranormal case, a whodunit, and Harry Dresden has to go solve it. But, I mean, I think that one of the things that I remember when I was really getting into a lot of the fiction that you were recommending, I love pulpy stuff. I love really like fast pace. I love just explosions and the
The cats. Cats running in the background.
Yeah, I love cats fighting because I've been on Reddit. Ultimate Spider-Man is pretty pulpy. Love it. So great. I don't like. I'm not someone who's like, oh, there's not a lot of sophisticated literary elements. And then so Dresden Files gripped me right away. There's some of the other, like Wheel of Time, I think is great, but a lot of times I can feel my brain getting a little sluggish because the descriptions are so involved. But everything in the Dresden Files is based on action and things happening. I was swept up. I think I read, it was starting with book 7 was White Knight. Is that right? It was either...
White Knight, book 9.
Yeah, that's right. Deadbeat was book 7. Yeah, so
yep.
book 7 through 12 I read in about 5 days. So, I mean, I just got really hooked on. So some of the things we wanted to talk about today, we want to talk a little bit about the really crisp pacing of the novels, how excellent that is, and how it relates back to a lot of the writing techniques that Jim Butcher includes on his blog. The world building, the character arcs, the reveals, and of course at the end we wanted to talk a little bit about changes, which is one of the most moving experiences. So, I want to begin with the plot and pacing because that's something that I think can be addressed on a sort of individual book level. Like pretending that you're watching this and you're like, I want to read Stormfront right after this. It's just amazing, like you were saying earlier, that there's a cliffhanger at the end of pretty much every single chapter. And there's so much that's done in each one. I mean, even in Stormfront, I would say it had the least number of tools available. It couldn't build upon any existing characters. It couldn't build upon any of the existing mythology that was really, really brilliantly established in later books. And
it had to rely totally on Harry Dresden being a compelling character right from the get-go and a really fast plot.
Yeah, and I mean, and a lot of it was kind of... It was funny because a lot of it, when I first read it, I felt like, oh, this is just about an evil wizard. Okay, so you're taking modern-day Chicago and you're putting in an evil wizard. Okay, I kind of see how this is going to go. But one thing that impresses me so much about Jim Butcher is that he uses that simple structure of, okay, we're going to investigate a series of grisly murders. But can he stop it? Can he stop the murderer? Can he deal with the Chicago PD and Johnny Marconi and a bunch of other people who are trying to get in his way? And there's all these little bits of description that are placed in there that are so enticing. On one hand, if you tell me, okay, here's a protagonist and he's an investigator and he's being accused of the murder, and the murder's really relevant to him, and as he's trying to solve it, there's this warden of the White Council who's getting in the way. Like, just from a basic narrative perspective, I'm like, okay, I'm used to obstacles. I'm used to the main character trying to solve the murder that he's being accused of. They're kind of proven techniques. But I especially love, like, right off the bat, introducing the notion of a soul gaze. Introducing some of the systems of magic, about the drawing of circles for supernatural entities, some of the potion mixing. There's some really weird characters like Bob the Skull that get introduced pretty swiftly. And all these things are the intriguing, unique bits of the Dresden Files, combined with the stuff that I already know, that immediately make me like, oh, this existing stuff kind of resonates with me already, but this stuff, ooh, this is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about resonance before, especially in the Hunger Games episode, which is the idea of, like, picking elements of a story that are going to kind of, like, set off emotions in the reader's head, because they're like, oh, sweet, I get this. And then combining those elements in a new way to create an original experience. Again, I don't think, any particular element of the Dresden Files is particularly original. I think, and, this is done deliberately. He's, derived from a huge variety of sources, both mythology, of other fantasy novels, of both the thriller and the urban fantasy genre. And then that sort of grounds it in familiarity that then allows him to take it in new directions. And in Stormfront, he doesn't stretch very far. I think Stormfront, especially once you've read the later books, is a very vanilla book.
Yeah.
it's a bit later when we talk about his writing style, we probably will get some insight into why it's more of a vanilla book. Um, but it's simple, but it executes that simplicity. And actually, another thing that I wanted to mention, you're talking about the character Bob the Skull. Here's something the Dresden Files does. It does humor really well.
Yeah, yeah.
It does snappy, snarky humor. And I don't know if it's just our generation or if it's everyone, but that really seems to appeal to people in our age group.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly that element of empathy where it's, in your head, like when you're taking a shower and you got in that argument with the bull, you didn't have the right thing to say to him. You're like, and then I would have said this and that, and you own him in your head. You're permitted to have in your brain worse judgment, and you get to be more of a badass. And Harry Dresden actually kind of has poor judgment. Like, he says brash, nasty things that are really witty, and you're just like, he didn't.
Yep.
And you just keep turning. Yeah, I'm hooked on that 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and that snap. Dresden Files is first person, so the voice of the protagonist is what you're hearing, and it's got to be compelling, snappy, and all that. And the Dresden Files just gets you right there. You're like, I like this guy, and we just the idea of this protagonist who just sort of cracks jokes and flings magic in the face of like dark wizards. It's just awesome. Like, we can never get sick of that.
Yeah. And coming back to the plotting a little bit, like it has just incredibly tight plotting, because this is something that you and I talked about after we saw the movie Looper, where it was just incredibly tightly plotted. And I'm not talking so much about like, okay, well now I have to talk about Looper a little bit, right? Like, so like, allow me to just take the idea of the time paradoxes and how those could conflict and sort of shove those aside. Often in a story, there will be a scene that will have one goal, and that's the only goal it has. But in a movie like Looper and throughout the Dresden Files, there's tons of things like that have multiple uses that keep coming up to where there's no fat on it. I really should use a Dresden Files example, but the Looper one is the one that comes to mind. There's a character who's introduced, and he can't get his motorcycle to start. And he asks for a ride from his friend, and they both go to a club together. And that's a really early scene. It sort of establishes that person as a little bit clumsy, gives you a little bit of sense of who he is, and then it just segues into the next scene. But for the rest of the movie, that motorcycle keeps appearing, and people keep having trouble starting it. And that it's like that tight plotting where things keep coming back. So you get something like Stormfront, Book 1, that has, the Warden of the White Council, Morgan, that has Johnny Marconi, that has Murphy, that has this, this evil wizard stuff going on. And as Harry's going everywhere, things that have happened or places that he has been keep coming back and keep circling back around to the point where it's the inner relationship that's really exciting. Not that there's so much new stuff that's happening all the time. So for me, that's one thing that makes his books really fun to read. A lot of poorly done thrillers or poorly done mysteries will, for instance, introduce who the villain could have even been halfway through. And then by the end, it's like, well, this guy is actually the villain. And you think, okay, well, that is the person I least expected, but it's also the least exciting person. Mm-hmm. But the fact that everything that is brought up ever, you're almost trained by Jim Butcher. Like, this is important. And this will be referenced. It might not be the key point to this book, but it will come up in one of the later books as one of the key elements. Even something as subtle as in Book 1, Harry Dresden talks about, with what happened with my master was some pretty gruesome stuff. I don't like to bring it up. And then he responds to that character then in some defensive manner. And of course, as a reader, you're like, what happened? Oh my God. Oh. And then, that sort of tension exists for the rest of that book. And then in Book 4 or Book 3, it's actually explained to you what happens. And I just love how there's no fat on the storytelling at all. It's just really, really clean, really, really good self-referential stuff.
Yep. Yeah, it's just so cool, especially looking back at Book 1. I said it was a little vanilla, but like he starts so many threads. that keep going. Maybe this is a good time to sort of segue into talking about like the structure of the series a little bit. So, Jim Butcher to some degree planned the Dresden Files when he started writing it. I'm not privy to exactly what level of granularity he did this at. But he sat down and said, you know what? I'm going to write a 20-something book series. So he did. So he said, how do you do this? So he's like, well, it's going to be tough if the books are all like incredibly Wheel of Time level interconnected, where it's just like they start to almost not stand on their own and get weighted down by like middle events. So he's like, okay, well, each one's going to kind of have its own theme, its own identity, but they're all going to be building towards something. Just to be clear, this is true. Like Jim Butcher has it's a flexible, but it's not that flexible number of total Dresden Files books he's going to be writing, and it's going to end in a apocalyptic trilogy. Like this has been established on his website for a long, long, long time. And the number of books before the final trilogy, he's said anywhere could be in the neighborhood of 20, basically. I think he said up to 23 times before. I don't think that's set. So he just sat down, took his notebook, took his Word file, and figured this out. And so that allowed him to start stuff in book 1 that doesn't get addressed till as Sean said, book 3, book 5. In some cases, things that start in book 1 don't get resolved until book 12. And I assume as we get, later books, we'll see things that, that still aren't fully resolved that start to get resolved too. That's incredible. I'm forgetting the name. What's the name of that? This like a special storytelling technique. It's the something gun, where it's like
the smoking gun.
No. I can't remember what's called. It's like if you want a gun to be used in some pivotal scene of your novel, have someone place it on the mantle like 8 chapters before, just as an incidental thing. And that makes it so much cooler when the reader gets to the final scene and they say, "Oh, the character's picking up the gun that Johnny put on the mantle in chapter 2. It's all coming to a head." And yes. It's like, there's nothing cooler for a reader than to see threads come together and to understand that those threads are coming together. And a lot of times in a really complicated series, threads are coming together all the time, but it's really difficult in a standard read to actually understand that because it's too complicated. It's too they're too subtle. There's too many things going on. Jim Butcher does a phenomenal job of not only interweaving things, but letting you follow how he's interweaving them, making sure that each of those threads stands out and is just crystal clear. And so I can, he had to have basically planned. He's like, okay, let's take the thread of Harry's past with his master, Justin, what's his last name?
Dumorn.
Justin Dumorn gets mentioned the very first time in book 1. I don't remember exactly where, but as just sort of gets thrown as an aside. And that's not resolved at all in book 1. There's not like, it's not like we go into a flashback and find the secrets of Justin Dumorn.
Yeah, and actually it was kind of interesting because now that you bring it up, it was that he had the doom of Damocles on him, and that's what Morgan was constantly there, and he was like, oh god, because of the shit that went down with Justin, ugh. Yep. And like it actually is a fairly significant element of the plot that the Warden Morgan is constantly on his ass.
Yep. Yeah, and Morgan is a plot thread that gets resolved in book
10.
11. I think it's 11. Is it 10? Oh shit, you're right. It's 10.
Turncoat?
Turncoat's 10.
No, it's the 11th. It's the 11th book.
Oh, is it?
How am I wrong? I could have sworn I was like 100%.
No, I was right the first time. You confused me.
I did. Oh, that's right. Oh, proven guilty. I completely forgot it was a book.
Yeah.
Oh my god, how embarrassing. Go ahead. No, you're so smart. You're brilliant. Book 11, it gets resolved.
But so Justin Dumorn. Okay, so Justin Dumorn gets mentioned. I don't actually know if he gets mentioned in book 2, but it seems like he has to get mentioned in book 2 somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna claim that's true. And then, like in future books, so which book does Elaine get introduced in? I think it's book.
3 or 4, because I know she was in book 4. She was like the emissary of the Summer Court.
Yeah.
Let's just say 4, man.
Yeah, so Elaine gets introduced at some point, possibly book 4. And so Elaine was the other apprentice under Justin Dumoulin with Harry. So it's like, okay, so his background starts to get complicated. It's like, first of all, we know he had some nasty master that he murdered. And then we found out he had an apprentice that he thought was dead, this other apprentice who thought was dead, and she turns out to be alive. And Elaine comes and she starts affecting the plot. And that starts complicated things because he finds out that Elaine was actually like a thrall of Justin Dumoulin and like controlled by her. So that introduces sort of like a trust issue. Harry's like, well, is Elaine a bad apple? Is she, you know? So there's a lot of sort of conflict there. Another complication, and I'm going to stop trying to pretend I know exactly which book these things happen in, because otherwise someone will skewer me, I'm sure. Is that Harry fought an outsider that was associated with Dumoulin. What was it? He who walks.
He who walks behind, man. That guy's such a badass.
And Harry kills him. And it turns out, in that complication, sort of leads to this revelation that Harry has some amount of power over outsiders, which is this really special thing. And now that starts interconnecting somewhere else, because the outsider thread is an arc that gets barely mentioned in the first few books, like so incidentally mentioned that I don't even know if I was aware of it when I was reading it, and slowly builds and just keeps building and building and building and building. And it does not get resolved by the end of book 12. It is something that continues onward.
And you can't spoil Cold Days.
And I'm not saying anything about books 13 or 14.
Yes, Ghost Story of Cold Days.
13, but he has not read Cold Days.
I'm he. You don't even call me you. You call me he. Like you're talking to someone else. Like, oh, this asshole hasn't read Cold Days.
I mean, I'm just trying to sort of isolate you and
that's fine. No, I'll just look. I'll come over here and just sit like very far away in frame. Be like, oh.
So back to me, Tristan Daniel Brand.
Your middle name's Daniel? I didn't know that. I knew there was a D. For some reason, I thought it was David.
What type of friend are you?
I'm a friend you refer to in third person. Actually, I do want to talk about, like, because I feel like Butcher just does such an incredible job of weaving all the stuff together, and a lot of it I credit to his emphasis on having really clean, clear story structure. Where, I mean, the fact that each one is a case that has a clear resolution to it. And the first few books are themed on a certain mythological concept. Like, book 1 is the evil wizard.
Yep.
Book 2 is werewolves, and everything that could possibly be represented as a werewolf is in there. And then
literally, he uses, what, five or six different types of werewolves.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's kind of cool.
And it's cool because, I mean, like, it's you impose the structure of the craft. Like, okay, this is going to be a book where there's a number of different werewolves that are in there, and he has to figure out who done it.
Yep.
But then there's, like, the sort of creative artistry element. Like, okay, what is my take on these different kind of werewolves, and how do I actually want them to weave together? But in my book, I'm like, werewolves. And then book 3 is a lot about the ghosts and the red and black courts. Well, primarily the red court vampires. And then Summer Night is about the Fey courts. And then Death Masks is about the Denarians. And each one of those, if my memory serves correct, has a little bit of other things that pop up in there. You know, like Murphy's always there. Johnny Marconi, you know, plays more or less a role in each of those. But after those 5 books, then when you step into Blood Rights, there starts to be a little bit of, like, a merger that ends up going on. And then by the time you get to, like, Proven Guilty and White Knight, all these characters and people that you're familiar with start interacting. So suddenly when they say something like there's a war between, you know, the war is in full effect between the Red Court and the White Council, and now the Fey Courts are getting involved. You're like, oh my god, no way! Like, it's done...
Oh, sorry, keep going.
He's insane. I don't know what
Yeah.
you're going to say. He's insanely good at that. And I almost feel as though you see this like you see the techniques he does at a small level repeated at a large level. So at a small level, characters, when they're introduced, tend to be somewhat one-dimensional. I think Butters is one of my favorite characters, who starts out fairly one-dimensional. He's a mortician who's a little bit curious. And that's it.
Kind of cowardly.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely
Maybe
very
not-
cowardly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, but he's like a small part, and then in the next one, he starts to actually become a major character, and his cowardice is sort of exposed, and he starts to play a more prominent role, and you get to know him, but he's almost like two-dimensional in that circumstance. And then he actually has the full arc where he starts to be brave in Deadbeat in the face of really terrifying things, and it's that moment where like, yeah, Butters! And now when Butters starts coming up later, or when Dresden's in a really bad bind and Butters comes out of nowhere and helps him, you're like, yes, I love that guy. Again, he started small and went up. And that's a smaller instance of almost exactly what happens with the early books. Like, oh, the Denarians they're jerks. Oh, Nicodemus is a douchebag. And then later on, when the Denarians get involved, it's not just the sort of one-dimensional villains.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. One-dimensional is a little bit derogatory, but I'm still going to use it. Like sort of simplify.
They're not just evil. They're not just like here are the evil guys and they're just evil and they do evil things with evil magic. It's like they have personalities, they have nuances, they have infighting. And even see examples of the Denarians not being 100% bad.
Yeah, like the fact that they're not part of the Black Court, and some of them have even defected from Nicodemus to join the Black Court.
I'm just, I'm going to interrupt our analysis. Which of all those factions is your favorite?
Oh.
Putting you on the spot.
I mean, I would say that far and away my two favorite plot lines are the Outsiders and the Black Council. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think I said Black Court earlier when I meant Black Council, but potato.
Yeah. I like the Denarians. I think the Denarians
they're pretty sweet.
Are my favorite. They're just really evil and insidious, and I love the coins. I want to talk about, okay, so, we've already sort of started doing this. We talked about how characters change.
Actually, can I totally interrupt you? I want to say one more thing.
Yes.
One thing because I was talking about small level and big level, and I think one of the coolest examples is that on Jim Butcher's blog, he writes about how there's the big middle. He always plans to have big, epic confrontations, like when there's the whole zombie fight in the middle of Deadbeat, where all the elements get brought together, and there's a really semi-climactic middle before the real climax at the end. And he does the same thing with the book series. The changes is that big middle to the series with the big climactic element. And again, it's just small and large. And I'm sorry, I wanted to finish that thought before you went on. Yeah.
It's a good thought. So we talked about we talk about these characters that we talk about Butters. Butters starts off as basically stock, cowardly, sidekick mortician. And then he evolves into this really interesting character. We're not going to talk about Ghost Story, but I'll just say that Butters comes into his own in Ghost Story, I think, too. But he's already sort of headed that way before then. All of the characters, like I'm going to make this audacious claim. All of the characters in the Dresden Files go through some pretty non-trivial character evolution. And I do not see this even in really large-scale fantasy series to the degree I see it in Dresden Files. And he does it in a lot less words. Here's an example. Molly Carpenter, I want to talk about. Molly Carpenter is an extremely important character to the series. So, brief background, because we haven't mentioned this character before. Michael Carpenter is this, he's a knight. He's a modern-day knight. He has a magic sword, and he is a man of God, and his faith defines him and defends him, and that's his magic. Like, his faith is, gives him incredible power. And he defends the world from the Denarians and other things, and he interacts with archangels and stuff. And also, as a brief side point, I would like to give Jim Butcher a ton of respect for, I feel like, very elegantly combining Christian mythology with non-Christian mythology in a way that doesn't, create awkwardness or contention.
Yeah, it's not disrespectful in the slightest.
And I think that's really difficult to do, and I think he does it beautifully. which is cool. But anyway, so Michael Carpenter is this just really, he's a badass too, but he's like almost too good to be true. And he has this family, and he has a daughter, Molly. And Molly starts off as sort of this innocent child at the start of the series when she gets introduced. I think she gets introduced in book. I'm not even trying to guess. One of the earlier books, 2 or 3, I believe. Might even get mentioned in book 1. No, because Michael does get mentioned in book 1. It's like 2 or 3. And when you first see Molly, she's really not like a character you think of anything.
She's almost an extension of Michael.
Yeah, she's just like, oh, she's Michael's daughter. And you immediately start thinking, okay, well, maybe, she's someone who can get into trouble, and she's like a weakness that someone can use against Michael. So those type of plot points. But through the series, Molly changes dramatically. First of all, she starts learning magic. And here's what's really cool, and I think this is just a really nice little twist. Molly takes it too far. Like, she learns magic, and she wants to be good like her father. But in book 8, she uses her magic. She's very skilled. She has the ability to get into other people's minds, which is highly, highly, highly illegal. It's one of the laws of magic that you cannot mess with someone else's mind. And she has friends who have these basically like addictions and problems. And she's like, well, I really, really want to help my friends stop these problems. So I'm going to make them feel fear whenever they think about their addiction, and that's going to make them stop. But she doesn't understand how much she damages them by sort of getting into their psyche and getting her fingers there. And this ends up getting her put on basically the shit list for the White Council. Breaking the laws of magic's a capital offense. So Harry has to like defend her and get the council together and convince them to vote not to kill her. And there's this really dramatic scene that involves the politics situation of the White Council, and Harry, the Merlin, who's the head, trying to get it set up so that he can basically vote to have Molly executed. And then Harry manages to get the rest of the council there just in time. And Ebenezer, who's kind of Harry's mentor and ally on the council, manages to get the vote basically 4-3 to sort of save Molly. But they then put her under the Doom of Damocles, which is what we saw in book 1 that was on Harry. And the Doom of Damocles basically says, okay, you're under probation, and if you screw up once, we can instantly execute you. No trial. We can just go over there and we can cut your throat. And they even have this total douchebag of a warden named Morgan, who is just totally happy to do that. And of course, Molly is sort of like, angry and upset and ashamed. And also at the same time, she's like, wait a minute, I was trying to do good. Why are they trying to execute me? So Harry tries to take her under his wing, and he makes her his apprentice and tries to sort of like teach her and rein her under control. And that seems to sort of work for a few books, but then because of the events of Changes, which we'll talk about later, she gets
she loses direction.
She loses direction, and we're not going to be able to go further into her plot arc because her plot arc again gets affected by books 13 and 14.
Because even though we're like this for like 12 and a half books, and so I don't know if you had more thoughts on the character arc. Molly specifically.
I just using Molly as an example. We could spend the next 2 hours going through like every character because like
totally.
they all
awesome. Well, I do want to talk about like the Molly character arc because I think she's a stunning example of the tight plotting throughout the Dresden Files. That the idea of there's I don't want to say this. So on one hand, the plotting's really, really tight. And then I'm going to say on the other hand, it's also tight in another way, so I don't know why I'm using that language. But so on one hand, it's tight in that, okay, Jim Butcher should have an apprentice. That seems like...
Jim Butcher should have an apprentice.
He should.
I should be his apprentice.
Should be Tristan, good.
But I don't, I guess he lost it in the mail, or it lost one. I'm not sure. Butcher watching this, though, you can call me anytime. I'm happy to.
Okay, so Harry Dresden has an apprentice. An interesting plot element. Certainly something that, would be completely reasonable to explore. The idea of apprenticeship is very common in standard wizardry stuff. Who's the apprentice? A character that's already existing. Tight plotting, sticking with who's there, and then continuing to explore the implications of that. And exploring them properly. Like, not having this apprentice show up and then not addressing the proper things like, well, Michael might have a problem with this. Mm-hmm. And then what does she get into? She gets into the same situation that Harry got into, the doom of Damocles, right? A lot of Eastern fiction, like in particular manga and anime, has what my roommate calls bad guy inflation, which is, like in Dragon Ball Z, they'll work hard and defeat some guy, and then all of a sudden this voice will appear and be like, "Ha-ha, you have merely defeated my foot soldier. You now must defeat me, but you must train to have over 30 million power level." And everyone's like, "Oh, that's going to be 3 seasons long." And but it's like it just swings in from left field, and they keep getting these higher and higher levels of final bosses without any sort of real connection between. There's not even any implication, There's not even like, okay, the Emperor's henchmen are out to get you, and there's the chief of the henchmen. And when they finally defeat the chief of the henchmen, they find out that the Emperor's after him. Okay, well, that's actually a simple way to have clearly established that this henchman is not the final bad guy, but that there's someone beyond it. And what's just always strikes me as brilliant about Butcher is that, like with the Doom of Damocles, it's a sort of knowable outcome. It's this, or a knowable conflict. You've had 6 or 7 books, 8 books. Gosh, it was a lot of books of Harry being like, God, and it's just such a pain in the ass having to live under the Doom of Damocles. Oh my gosh.
Harry's doom gets lifted in book 1.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be like, technically, yeah, but I mean, it's one of those things where it's like everyone's always like, Harry, and he like for the 8 books.
Yeah. I guess the taboo and the sort of stigma, not taboo, the stigma.
Yeah, that stigma sort of lasts throughout all those. So then what's happening to Molly? You're just like, and it's just like such tight plotting, and also I feel like another thing. This is the on the other hand I was referring to, is that so often in plotting a book or plotting a story, one of the most difficult things is figuring out a way to convey what you want in a way that feels logical and doesn't feel forced. Mm-hmm. We're talking about this with Harry Potter, how there's the magical map that shows the location of people, or the cloak of invisibility that Harry gets. These are essentially literary tools to permit this first-person novel to have the first-person character, or actually, is it tight third?
It's tight third in Harry Potter, but she hardly ever deviates, so she still needed those tools.
Yeah, I mean, I should say effectively first-person. Like, the camera's fixed on Harry. Gamers. The camera's fixed on Harry, and, okay, so these are literary tools to permit Harry to be in places that he shouldn't be, to hear conversations he shouldn't, that in a normal book you would just transfer vantage point. You'd transfer the camera to be on those people. There's so many of those. Like, okay, how do we create... Okay, so there's information about this wizardly universe. How do we create a way for the reader to get that information? Or there things that have happened in Harry's past. How do we get the reader to get that information? Or there's cosmic forces that are fighting against Harry. How do we create the tension and the drama between that? And in almost every circumstance, the answer that Jim Butcher provides is via a character, which makes it really dialogue-driven and very interaction and action-driven. How do you get the information about the world of wizardry? Well, you have Bob the Skull, who's an air spirit who knows everything. So Harry will go down there, have banter with essentially a Wikipedia of mythology. But It's not...
Who's funny, by the way. I actually think it's really important that Bob the Skull is funny.
Yeah, Bob the Skull's funny. Every time Bob's there, I'm like, yeah, let's hear about some filthy romance novel. I want to hear about some smut and crazy info about the Gruffs. Like it's perfect because there's so many info dumpy books I've read where it's like, well, I wanted to head out west. In the Westlands, the mountains are dark and the spires rise up into the air of the merfolk angels.
And you're already like, I don't care.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not that I'll read it, I'm not going to lie. Like Mass Effect, every time there was like a codex entry, I'd read every codex, like every extra bit of information.
But that's different because when you're playing a video game and you discover a codex that already has an interactivity that a sort of info dump in a book, a poorly done info dump in a book doesn't, where it's like you pick it up and it's just like, in the West, the Black Mountains, hold the secret of the Sky King. And it's just like, there's no context, there's no interactivity, there's no commitment. Like, info dumps work when you have some commitment to the sort of context of the info dump. We have, Bob the Skull is nothing but an info dump machine, as he pointed out, but we have commitment to him because he's actually a pretty cool character in his own right.
And because it's a character, you can create so many interesting interactions like, hey, I want to know about this. And Bob the Skull's like, dude, I really don't want to talk about that. Because that's a reasonable interaction in a character-to-character basis. It helps with that sort of tease of withholding information from like a, story perspective. But it's you can't do that at all with just a first-person info dump. And certainly there's first-person info dumps where Harry's like, when you mix a potion, here's the things you got to think about. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. Never more than 3 or 4 paragraphs. But like Bob the Skull, he's like perfect for that. Or how do we explore some of the backstory of Harry Dresden? Well, we give him an apprentice who experiences a really similar thing. And then he can talk to Molly about what goes on with that.
Yep, it's also an excuse to do. It's like a really good excuse to have a flashback too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's if you think about it, if you think about the grand scope that's being presented, like the Red Court and the Black Court and the Fey Kingdoms and the Denarians, they're all sort of represented with very small subsets of characters. Like Mob Mob's a really notable Fae, or Mavra from the Black Courts, or Bianca. And it provides these anchors to act as a representative for this entire group. Like Mavra, like there's been, I'm about to say that, but I don't know if that's true. If, for instance, a bunch of Black Court vampires showed up and tried to kill Harry, and he battled them all off, and then Mavra was there and was like, ugh, and said something all gross and black vampire-y and stuff, and went away, it's so much more effective in my mind as a reader than if it was just like a couple of Black Court vampires arrived and they were, the second initiate rank of like 14 initiate ranks before they hit lieutenant, and the commander admiral is Mavra way up here. It's like it brings the head of the organization straight for the interaction with Harry, and it just is so great because like everything's a conversation. It's all dialogue and it's all interaction between these peoples.
I'm gonna make sort of a side point, but it's just something I think is cool, because that's what we talk about in this show.
Good. Bam.
You were talking about sort of this idea of this progression of like boss fights, basically. It's like, obviously me and you are guys who like video games. No surprise to the audience, hopefully.
Surprise.
If you try to take video game sensibilities and put it in the book, it can kind of be stupid and contrived. Like, as you point out, where it's just, that sort of the manga approach, where it's like, you defeat the guy at the end of the book, and it's like, actually, he was only the peon. I am the true enemy. And, as someone who loves storytelling, I frankly think that's terrible storytelling.
You should read Claymore. They do a really good job of that.
Okay. But you can make that work and appeal to my video game nerd, and I love it when it happens. And my favorite example of this is the Gruffs.
Oh, those were really awesome.
So in the middle of book 10...
I want to say it was Small Favor. Yeah, book 10.
I believe it's book 10, Harry encounters the first Gruff, who's basically this goat man, which is, of course, based on the Billy Goat's Gruff, the Brothers Grimm story. Um, and they fight, and Harry I can't remember if he kills him or hurts him. I think he kills him. And it's kind of like, it seems almost like a throwaway fight in that the Gruff was just like another bad fairy enemy. Like, it just wasn't, it was just a thing. And then later on, the bigger Gruff comes and says, "You killed my brother." And Harry's like, "Well, come on now. He attacked me. I was just defending myself." And Gruff's like, "It is my honor that the Gruffs must, defend
be tough.
honor. Yeah, be tough." But, well, Harry's like, well, fuck, fine. So he fights the second Gruff. He kills him. And then he has to fight the next Gruff. And it's like, this is sort of this is not the main plot point of that book. Like, not at all. This is a side plot that just sort of gets peppered in. But first of all, it's cool. Second of all, Butcher uses those three events, the fighting of the three Gruffs, to accentuate the actual plot. Like, he picks like maximal tension times where it's like, this is a really inconvenient time for me to have to fight the final Gruff. And that's just awesome. So it's like he takes this little side thing, which is going to appeal to people like me, and it's cool, and he makes that work for his plot in a very reasonable way.
Yeah, and I will
really
say,
like
that's, again, I love just the storytelling structure in that sense that, like, from a if you just extract that arc, it's really simple. It's like weakest Gruff, middle Gruff, strongest Gruff. Ta-da! It helps just anchor those points so nicely. And, one thing that I wanted to just touch on a little bit before we talk about, like, reveals in the book and changes, is the confidence with absolutely crazy ideas. I have never seen someone write such ludicrous things that as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, yeah, of course that happened. That makes total sense. He raises a Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton from the dead and rides into battle with it, and I didn't read that, and I was like, what 8-year-old wrote this shit, right? Like, that didn't occur to me. I was like, of course, they introduced the dinosaur in the museum, and the conflict was brought back to the museum later, and when he revived himself barely alive, the Tyrannosaurus Rex was there, so of course he went into battle with it. I'm reading this, and I'm like, yes, hit him, jump over the flaming police car with the dinosaur corpse, like... And, we've talked about this a lot before, that as ridiculous as that is as a statement in a vacuum, a writer can convince the reader that anything is fine as long as there's a series of logical steps to get there. And, I mean, this is on Jim Butcher's blog. He recommended Jack Bickham as, like, an amazing author of just story writing craft. And in here, Bickham writes about how, I think I said this in the last episode as well, that in fiction has to make more sense than real life. Because people will just get sick in real life. And that's just normal. You're just like, how are you? Oh, I got sick. And it's like, well, that sucks. But in a book, I mean, you just can't have your characters get sick. Jack Bickham writes about how you have to have the character be exhausted from lack of sleep and overstressed, and then go into a hospital where there's a bunch of sick people, and a boy walks up to him and coughs phlegm into his mouth. And then in the next chapter, he's allowed to get sick in a logical chain sort of sense. Mm-hmm. And, that might sound frustrating on one hand, but it's also, Jim Butcher uses that as a strength to be able to say, okay, well, I think, here's a cool scene. In the climax, writing a dinosaur skeleton that has been raised from the dead into battle, and it makes everyone just be like, oh, what the hell? Mm-hmm. So how do we create a logical sequence of scenes and interactions and story setup to where this is the next logical thing? Mm-hmm. It's just brilliant. Like, the water balloons filled with holy water, or water guns filled with holy water. Yes. All these things where you're just like, oh, that's genius,
Yep. It's brilliant.
And actually, I do want to talk about the reveals. I just want to segue right into that. I think that Jim Butcher does an amazing job consistently of doing reveals in books at small and large scales really well. And I want to start at the small scale, where a chapter might end with, all right, it's going to be you and me against 15 Black Court vampires and, 40 million zombies, and just like lists off everything. And he's like, we'll have to do some planning. And my partner said, all right, let's do it. And then the next chapter is just them having shown up. And it's just like, we went there. The duffel bag was heavy with all the tools that we brought prepared. There was no way we were going to win in a straight-up fight. And then that's it. That's all he says. And they start going into the battle. And then, like, I'm reading it, I'm like, well, what's in the duffel bag? Like, what's going on? And then midway through the battle, it's revealed what's actually in there. And it creates this... It's a really simple way to create the intrigue. But every single time, I'm like, what the heck's going on here? Even really simple things like when he shows up in a bathrobe to the White Court. Or to the White Council. I remember I just burst into laughter when that happened. I was like, oh my god, no way, in a bathrobe. And because, it's like, so I showed up and people looked at my garb and I said, so what are you looking at, etc., and it just moved on. And then it starts to become clear that he's wearing something crazy. But Jim Butcher doesn't tell you yet. Like, those sorts of simple reveals are so effective. That simple withholding, just making you a little curious. Boom.
Curious?
Huh?
Yeah. I expected you to keep talking, so I allowed the awkward silence to sort of continue.
Well, if you want, I could talk about Wizard Peabody, which is my favorite reveal in the entire series.
Yeah, go for it.
Yay! Yapta! Yeah, I feel like, I saw this, like on Goodreads, a lot of comments about Stormfront where people were like, oh, it was totally obvious that it was Victor Sells who was the evil wizard. He was the first person, he was the first person introduced. They're like typing like that with that weird... Those jerks.
A pretentious nerd list.
Yes, oh my god, this is really a very poorly done story. Yeah, like, consistently, when things are revealed to me, I have the feeling of like, no way. And when reveals happen, I should feel like I was tricked. Or I should feel like it makes sense after I've been told it, but there was almost no way I could have known unless I really thought about it hard. And Wizard Peabody was one of my favorite reveals ever. Because structurally, I even went back and skimmed through the previous books that there's constantly mysterious stuff going on. Like how did the FBI agents get the belts in book 2 to become werewolves? That's kind of weird. And then some more things dropped in throughout over time, and of course Harry becomes suspicious. There's someone. Oh yeah, it was during the battle of the Red Court and the White Council when it was clear that there was someone who was a traitor in the White Council, and there was no way that anyone could have known except the people who were on. Who are the 7 people who are the head of the
council?
Yeah.
Ebenezer, the gatekeeper, the Mer.
No,
wait, what?
What I mean is that there's like is the Wizard Council? Because I always mess the names up. Because there's the.
Yeah.
Is it the Wizard Council of the White Council? Because I keep calling the White Council just like the wizards.
Yeah.
What's the right terminology?
I don't know the terminology offhand.
I would botch this, but whatever. But it's clear that one of the 7 on the White Council are the only people who could have known about that, and that's stated very.
The senior council.
The senior council of the White Council. Okay, there we go.
Wikipedia to the rescue.
Yes, thank God, I was close. Yeah,
I just wish we had Bob the Skull for these things.
Right? Then he could tell us filthy things too.
Yeah.
But it's established. Ebenezer and Dresden discuss, like, okay, the only people who could have known about the location of that thing is one of the people on the 7, or is one of the 7 on the senior council. and then the book ends, and you're like, oh damn. So in each book, one or two of those characters from the senior council play a significant role.
Yep.
So from a reader perspective, I'm getting the chance to inspect these two characters and analyze in my head. Oh, you're doing that. You're being kind of suspicious. And then, and oh, Jim Butcher's, oh, Jim's so good about, like, oh, dude, the Merlin. Mm-hmm. The Merlin's gotta be it. It has to be it. And the whole book kind of establishes
he's a huge douchebag.
He's an asshole, man. And then, like, close to the very end, the Merlin does something that makes you go, like, okay, well, that can't be him. He's go to the gatekeeper and start to explore that whole arc. And you're like, oh, I bet it can't be him. And I hit this point. It was maybe 3 or 4 chapters before Peabody was outed. That I was like, okay, dude, I don't know. I actually can't figure it out. And that was one of the only moments where I was consciously, because I remember I was actually on a plane, and I had to stop reading and put it away and, like, get in a taxi and go, and I can't read while I'm in a taxi because I get sick. And I remember just thinking, it can't be anyone. And unless he pulls some miracle off with one of these 7 characters, I'm going to be mad. Mm-hmm. Because I hate when any fiction is like, well, this character's dead. Why did he die? Because a nuclear missile went through his head. And then he's alive later because they were like, let's make him alive. If any one of those 7 characters was going to be the villain, I would have been like, well, that's bullshit. No, he's not. You demonstrated to me that he wasn't. And then when it was Wizard Peabody, I remember I stopped and I went, oh shit. Like, I remember I was reading those pages so fast up to there, and then was Wizard Peabody, it instantly clicked. I was like, oh my god, he has access to all the war records. Oh my god, of course. Oh my god, he's the perfect person to have slipped through under my radar. And that has got to be the greatest reveal I've ever experienced in any fiction ever, is with Wizard Peabody. And I was like, oh my god. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm done talking for a little bit. Like, winded. That was just like so
nope,
big.
You have
for
to keep
me.
going, Sean.
Oh, Wizard Peabody, and then the Moor died. Oh.
Should we move on to changes?
I mean, unless you want to talk a little more about the reveals and whatnot.
So I mean, I think you actually covered, I think, every point I would have made. He just, like, it's part of his pacing. It's like, there's a cool thing to be revealed. There's, like, many cool things to be revealed, and he picks 3 or 4 every single novel. And because he has so many factions and so many mysteries and so many places to be explored, there's, like, so much space for reveals.
Yeah.
And I love that, because it's like, my favorite thing in books is when there's, like, a hidden door or, like, a locked door. And it's like in chapter 3, you're like, oh yeah, this is the locked door. And it's got, like, mysterious runes, and it's all crazy. And the main character's like, oh, well, can I get into it? And they're like, no one goes through the locked door. Or it's like, dude, anyone who's been through the door, can't talk about it. You know what book I'm talking about right now.
Name
right?
of the Wind.
Name of the Wind, which Patrick Rothfuss, right? He introduces this locked door in, like, chapter 3, and I'm going to have to wait till book 3.
I haven't read book 2.
Or released. The door does not get revealed in book 2. I will anti-spoiler it.
This is the door in the library?
That's all I care about. It's just like,
wait,
I want to know what's behind the door.
Is it the door in the library?
Yes.
Oh god, that door.
He even teases. He even directly teases the reader. We're talking about Patrick Rothfuss now. He directly teases the reader when one of the characters who's been through the door, like when quote the main character, Man of the Wind, is complaining, and the guy's like, "Oh yeah, the door. Yeah, it killed me to figure out what was behind the door. Oh man, ha 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 ha." And then they just say nothing about it. And you're like, "Damn it." Dresden Files is just full of locked doors. It's this mysterious doors. Some of the mysteries are sort of like, okay, this is obviously going to get explained soon. Others, it's not clear if they're going to get explained. Here's a mystery. I don't even know if this is a mystery. I want to know more about the Jade Court. The Jade Court is a court of vampires that has been mentioned very few times, and they originate in Asia. And that's, like, all we know about them.
Yeah.
And I want to know more about them. I don't know why I want to know more about them. maybe they're really boring. Maybe they just sit around like playing mahjong and smoking, and that's why they haven't been mentioned. But
Oh.
I want to know more about the Jade Court.
You know, I that statement right there, I think, is like the perfect way to credit the entire series. For something that you've been given very little information about, other than that the black court is sweet, the red court is sweet, the white court is sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So when Butcher writes the words Jade Court, you're like, I'm ready for sweet.
Yep.
I feel like Lost struggled with this, the television series, a lot, where it created so many, like you said, locked doors.
Yep.
But never opened any.
Yeah.
Or opened them. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was actually just going to repeat. It opened them very slowly, and it didn't give you enough things to. So like, I want to use the term widgets here because me and you talk about storytelling widgets, right? You remember this conversation? Like all of these characters, all of these factions are storytelling widgets that Butcher has to play with. You can connect the widgets together.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I know what you mean now. Yeah.
So yeah, Butcher has a billion locked doors, but he also has a billion of these widgets and things that the reader knows about that he can use to, first of all, entertain you while the doors are locked, and B, he can use those to connect to whatever's behind the door. So it's not like, I mean, if Butcher, if it's like you start book 15 or whatever, and it's like, and Harry discovered that actually everyone that's been around this is the evil, Darklings from Mars, and you're just like, well, what the fuck? Darklings from Mars haven't been mentioned at all, like, and that just like totally cheapens like this whole sweet like network of awesome badass things he has. But instead of it's like in book 15 opens with the Darklings from Mars that are under in an alliance with the Winter Court who have been secretly working with the Jade Court or something like that, and they're just like, oh sweet.
Oh, I'm
and then
on board.
And then of course Dresden can go to Mars and reenact John Carter from Mars, which is the greatest movie ever.
Oh, I really hope that Butcher rewrites Mars Needs Moms. Because that was a box office flop that was inches from getting there.
I heard that movie wasn't even that bad. Not that I can speak from experience, but
It was pretty bad. I don't know why I went. I went by myself. It was sad. I'll describe the order of that day. So my house loses power for no reason every now and again, and it's never for long, but I was sitting at my computer being useless. I was like reading Reddit. I was like 8 pages into the front page of Reddit, and every link was purple because I was like opening up all of them being like, it was like the not even cute cat pictures I was getting to where the cast was sort of like, hey. And then we lost power, and I was like, I'm going to go see any movie. And I went to this terrible theater by my house that's actually, I probably got hepatitis from being in this theater. And I saw Mars Needs Moms, and it was on this tiny, awful, it was a small theater in LA. I didn't even get popcorn. I just sat down and watched a terrible movie and went home with my germs. And then read the reviews, and it had 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I was like, 8? 8? Just don't list it. It's so low. I don't know. That's a tangent. But yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I feel like you deliberately didn't tell me that story.
Well, I mean, it was stupid because there was this period of time where I was going on runs every day, and I would always walk by this...
Mm-hmm.
I would run by this poster for Mars Need Moms, and then I just popped into my head, and I was like, it's CGI, it has to be good. Stupid man, I'm sorry. You want to talk about changes?
No. I talk about Mars.
Today's episode of Why We Didn't Like It.
Okay.
Changes, I think, is one of the most crazy intersections of everything. So let me the Wikipedia article on this sums up the degree to which this is epic, right? It starts off introducing that Dresden is a father.
Mm-hmm.
Mac. Before we even say that, every book is 2 words. Storm front, full moon, grave peril, summer night, death mass, blood rights, blah, 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 to turncoat. And then it just changes.
Yep.
Shivers.
And it breaks things. Every other book starts with, here's the case. To some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it technically changes. Like, I guess you can call him discovering he has a daughter and she's been kidnapped as a case, but it is a totally different feel. It is like, getting hit by cold water or like ice cold water. It's just like, what? And it happens there's no sort of build up where it's like chapter 1, Harry Dresden's drinking coffee, he's chatting with Murphy, he's talking with Bob the Skull, making a potion, thinking about Chicago, looking at the weather, gets a phone call. It's like chapter 1, it's like he gets a phone call, and this is like line 2 of the book. This is Susan, we have a daughter, she's in trouble. And Harry's like, what? And it's like, a 50-word scene.
Hold on, stay here. Hold on. Where's changes?
I hope I'm right.
Aha.
Sean's gonna prove me wrong if I'm wrong, though.
What'd you say?
Said, I hope I'm right.
Yeah, let's find out. I answered the phone, and Susan Rodriguez said, they've taken our daughter.
Yes! Victory!
No, excuse me, that was line number 1. Not 2.
You have to do the next episode in that voice.
I wonder why we like it. The show where we talk about the correct fiction.
Yes, we have to use correct fiction.
Correct fiction, yes.
That's the new title of this. That's the new title of the show. Sean and Tristan, correct fiction.
Yeah, it'll be like one of those weird, scary stories about a dictator listing out only what children can learn, and what's heresy.
You have to be aggressively unfunny and mean, both to the audience and each other. You have to make a point, and I'll just be like, and you'll be like, so Tristan, what do you think? I'll be like, it's kind of stupid, like most things you say, Sean.
Well, I understand, but you're mistaken. I don't know. We're not even good at being asses to each other. It's not in our nature. I don't know. Whatever. Anyways, changes. So every single thing that has been established is broken right away. And as good storytelling is to increase the dramas for the main character, but it's normally he goes to solve the case and then he gets accused of being the murderer. So he has to run away. And then while he runs away, he sprains his ankle. So now he's limping, but he has to hike a mountain to get answers, and you just you keep it like that. But every single chapter, I was like, Jesus!
Yeah. It's brutal.
Yeah, Harry's office building is revealed to be owned by the Red Court vampires and is destroyed by C4.
Yeah.
His apartment complex burns down.
His car, which shows up in every book, gets destroyed.
As does his oak staff.
Yep, his staff gets destroyed.
Ebenezer McCoy is his maternal grandfather.
Yep. So one of the sort of themes or motifs that comes up a lot is Harry has always been sort of on the edge of the dark side his entire life, and always on the verge of becoming a monster. And this is something he fears, and he's really worried about that. He knows his methods are kind of borderline, and he's definitely taking it a little too far. This was really explored with the Lash arc, which we didn't talk about too much, but he was being tempted by a Denarian, but he ends up turning that around to a certain degree, and the fays, his fairy godmother and Mab are always tempting him with power. The Denarians are tempting him with power. Everyone's luring him to the dark side. And Harry Potter, not Jesus Christ, Harry Dresden. Shut up.
You're mistaken. Harry Potter is not the protagonist of this series.
He's the protagonist if I say he's the protagonist. Harry Potter and Hermione were just well, fuck, our daughter's been taking the Red Court. It's real awkward. Anyway, so he's always getting tempted, he's always saying no, he's saying no. In this book, he gets fucking paralyzed. His back is broken. He cannot move his legs. And this is all when he's trying to set up, like, going to save his daughter. And he calls in every favor. He calls in the Archangel Uriel, and he's like, Uriel, you better fucking fix me. And Uriel is like, nope, can't do that. And after all this fails, Harry's just like, fuck it. Maeve, you said you wanted to make me the Winter Knight, which is just like this really cruel, sadistic, like, representative of the Winter Court. I'll take it. You fix my back. You give me time to save my daughter. And then I'll do whatever the hell you want. Just like, almost like cold. Just like, yeah, I'll go evil for the chance of saving my daughter. And the Maeve, the Winter Lady's like, yeah, okay, deal. I mean, she fights a little bit, but like, yeah, it's basically a deal. And you're just like, holy shit. This is a turning point. This is the turning point that he's not going to be able to get out of. Like, how the hell does he get out of
That's
this?
exactly what I thought when I was reading it.
He is going to be... Yeah.
Yeah, like in between work shifts at MLG on day 3. I was like...
Yeah. It's like, we talk about characters like digging themselves holes and then getting out of them, and you have like try-fail cycles, and it's like if you're Batman in the set prison, you have to try 3 times before you can climb out. It's like, you see the cycle of 3 in Dresden quite a bit too, where it's like something goes wrong and Dresden tries twice, and you're like, yeah, he'll get out of it. Here it's just like, he is fucked. And like Changes is mostly about him getting just fucked, like in many different ways. And you're just like, he can't do anything about this. And like, as the conclusion, like, they drive to this sort of confrontation with the Red Court. And the Red Court has like this mega powerful ritual. And they're like these godlike beings. And it's just like Harry and his allies. And like everything's arrayed against them. And it just seems like this immense amount of power. And you're just like, how the hell is Harry going to stop this?
And then he does.
And then he does in one of the most, I want to say the Dresden Files is violent. And it's kind of dark, but there's a lot of lightheartedness. There's enough snap and snarkiness to it that you're not like, it's not Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I can.
Except the end of Change, the climax of Changes, starts to get into Game of Thrones territory. It is just dark. It's dark to the point where I know some people who like the series and read the whole thing really got bothered by what happened there. And basically what happens, very, very briefly, is that Harry's lover, Susan, who we didn't talk about, is another really interesting character. Susan was transformed partially into a Red Court vampire very early on, and has been basically fighting her addiction the entire series. And she's sort of like always on the verge of going over. And the Red Court is trying to do this bloodline spell, where basically they cast this horrible curse on Harry's daughter, and that like wipes out the whole bloodline. So Harry's dead, his brother Thomas is dead, some other people are dead, and there's like nothing you can do about it. So, but at the final moment, Harry redirects the spell. So 2 things happen. First of all, he lets Susan feed on him and transform herself into a true Red Court vampire. And then he redirects the spell so the target is Susan. And as a Red Court vampire, the bloodline is now all Red Court vampires. So Harry directs the spell onto his lover to save his daughter and massacres every Red Court vampire all in one swoop.
And ends the war.
And ends the war. And you just have this, I don't actually know what the image of the book is, but the image in my head is just of Harry just like sitting there drenched in his, former lover's blood. And like just surrounded, this is in like Machu Picchu or something, surrounded by just like dead vampires and dead people and like death and horrible, black magic. And just like knowing that he now has to go back and give himself to Maeve and be basically transformed into this into this monstrous, the monstrous Winter Knight. And that, yes, he saved his daughter, but basically everything else about his world has crumbled. Like it's burned, literally in some cases, in the case of his apartment. And that climax, you're just like, holy fuck. Now, if that was the end of the novel, that would be one hell of an end. But there's another chapter. And in that chapter, Harry's going back and basically sort of reflecting on the fact that he has to be the Winter Knight and everything, and that his daughter's safe, and a bunch of people are dead, and he's not sure what's going to happen in the future. And he's on his houseboat. Is it his houseboat or is it someone else's?
I think it was Thomas's.
It's Thomas's houseboat. He's just sitting there. He's kind of reflecting, and he hears the sound. He looks down, and there's blood coming from his chest. He realizes he's just been shot by a sniper rifle. And he topples into the water, and his vision fades to black, and the book ends.
I still remember like being teary-eyed and having the producer in my ear at MLG be like, and 5, 4, and I was like, welcome to the final match. It's the finals. I actually wonder if I can get this image.
I mean, I get a little, that is probably one of the most powerful moments, emotional moments I've had reading a book, is reading the end of Changes. Because Changes was already so damn emotionally powerful and so brutal and so well written. And then I got to the end, and they hit you with that, and it's like Butcher left you already vulnerable and weak, and then he just pushed you right over the edge. And then he ended the book. And it's just... It's unexpected, and it's powerful, and it's brutal, and it's kind of mean. And it only works because it's book 12, and because of everything he's established, and because of the trust he's built. But having to wait months until you read book 13, it's one of those powerful storytelling experiences I think I've ever had.
Yeah, I will say that I was very lucky in that I read it while being in possession of Ghost Story. And
that's got to be a pretty different experience, I think.
Yeah,
in some ways.
I always wonder about that sort of like in the moment release versus binge, because I remember you and I watched season 7 of 24 every week when it came out. We'd watch it, whereas everything else I'd watched like in the last 48 hours. I would just binge watch each season of 24, and it was a lot. It was very different the way that you would get that opportunity to stop and reflect and try to figure out. Because for me, I had this like, I have to get home so I can read and make sure that Harry's okay. Yeah. But I mean, like, when you finished that, were you just like... Because didn't you read Changes when, like...
I read Changes within a month of it coming out. So I had to wait a good year and a half for Ghost Story.
What was that? Are you okay?
I'm not. I'm not.
Especially after Hermione and Harry had a child.
Yeah, that was really, really awkward.
Brutal. I hate when you read that sort of fan fiction. Wow.
Yeah. But boy, Changes. And the fact that let's go back. That was the middle of the series. There's a ton more books. And that makes me so happy. Dude, it makes me warm inside right there.
It's like what you said with about book 1 of Game of Thrones, that when I'm going to spoil something huge, so turn this off or watch episode 1. The death of I can get around this. The death of a major character made many people be like, "Well, I'm done reading this. I don't care what else happens. Like, I don't want to read anymore. I've had enough." I almost had that. I don't want to say I almost had that feeling of like rejection of the series, but it had such finality to it.
Yep.
It had this feeling of such finality that, in a sense, I didn't have that like, God, I got to read the next thing as much. I mean, part of me was like, oh my God. Like, I remember being like, I have to get home and make sure he's okay.
Yep.
As more of like a worry, as opposed to this sort of like...
Yeah, I mean, you're worried about, like, I know the series isn't done and he has to somehow get out of that, right?
Yeah.
I know that intellectually, but like, emotionally, I'm worried. It's just like, I care about Harry. I want him to be okay. And he's, floating with a bullet wound in the middle of the ocean. And I don't know what's going to happen.
It's minus EV.
Yeah.
I mean, and I still remember when I was waiting for Cold Days to come out, and I still had this worry that everything was going to be okay because there's more characters that I get that worry about, and just to stop and think, these characters are not real. This is just a series. And I mean, for me, what was in reflecting back on that, I got into the Dresden Files when all the rest of my work was really peaking up, where
Yeah.
I would come home during the week and I'd put in 7-8 hours of work and then prepare for a live show and do that, and a lot of times just sort of drool at my computer or go to sleep, and then I would get on an airplane on Thursday or Friday and fly somewhere and work all weekend, do some live event, and come home and just rinse and repeat. And I just would bring one Dresden Files book with me, like, every single time. And it was like the alternate universe that, for me, like, all of the second half of 2011 and the start of 2012 and up through, mid-end 2012 was just like all Dresden Files.
Yep.
That's like the other part, and it's so cool to me. It's all fiction. None of it happened, like.
It's really powerful. I really, everything that we talk about this show is awesome. But guys, if you're gonna read anything, read this. It's you only get to experience it once. I'm really sorry I can't forget it and do it again. So
wow.
Pick up Stormfront, and
Actually,
you won't regret it.
Now that we've done this episode, I think I'm just gonna go reread the whole series. Like, I'm not doing it in preparation for the next one. I'm just doing it because I want to reread the whole series. But I think
well, he's got a new series. He's working on a steampunk series called The Cinder Spires. I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm pumped for that. The Codex Alera.
Also, and the Codex Alera is a complete fantasy series, which he's also published. That's 6 books. It's very, very good. I don't think it's as good as the Dresden Files, but I still recommend it. So.
Well, I think that's the perfect spot to end.
I think it is too.
So, well,
thank you, Sean, for discussing the Dresden Files.
Thank you, Tristan, for suggesting the Dresden Files when I was like, Tristan, I want to read more. What's a good book? And you're like,
you're right. I gave you this gift.
You did. No, and it was so funny because I still remember when I was like, dude, like, what is there any like book series that you'd like recommend? Because you talk about all the epic fantasy you're reading, but is there one that you really want? You're like Dresden Files. It was like instant. It wasn't even like, well, what sort of things do you like? You're just like Dresden Files, and
yep.
I was like, okay. And then I bought Stormfront, and then I bought Full Moon and Grave Peril, and then I bought all the rest of them. Those were the 4 purchases.
Yep.
So without any further ado, I am Sean Plott.
And I am Tristan Brand. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you for watching Why We Like It. Episode 4. It's going to be... I was about to tell you that it's going to be uploaded to YouTube in a little bit, but you're watching this on YouTube, so let's do that again. I'm Sean Plott.
I'm Tristan Brand.
Thank you for watching. See you later.